The story of what happened in that small, quiet village began long before the screams. People would often say the air itself carried secrets, but none heavier than those around little Anaka's home. Her stepfather, Malam, was known to everyone. Tall, broad, and loud, a man whose temper burned like dry firewood. And yet no one truly saw what went on behind those cracked mud walls. One morning, before the sun had even touched the hills, his rage once again filled the yard. He tied Annika to the whipping post with no mercy, the coarse rope biting into her thin wrists. The post stood in the center of their yard like an old judge that had seen too many punishments. Her cries cut through the morning air, sharp, trembling, desperate. It was a sound familiar to everyone in that village, and still, the people pretended not to hear. Malam punished her for every little mistake. A spilled drop of water, a clumsy step, a moment's delay. "It's for your own good," he would laugh. "This is how strength is made." But his laughter was cold, and his eyes showed no kindness. Neighbors like Donna Selma, the midwife, or old Mr. Bach, who passed with his donkey full of firewood, saw things they wished they hadn't. They turned their faces away, whispering that silence was safer than truth. Naomi, Annika's mother, believed her husband's lies. Malam had fooled her completely. To her, he was a strict but caring man, a husband who wanted the child to grow obedient and strong. She never saw the bruises hidden under Annika's loose, dusty clothes. She never heard the muffled cries swallowed by the wind. But that illusion was about to be broken forever. It happened on a stormy night, when thunder crawled across the sky like a wounded beast. Naomi, half asleep, heard a sound, a sharp cry, one she could no longer ignore. That night, fate decided it was time. What she saw with her own eyes would burn itself into her heart forever. It wasn't just her trust that shattered. It was her soul that caught fire, the fury of a mother awakening after years of blindness. The next morning came quietly. The birds were still half asleep in the trees, and the mist hung low over the grass. But Malam's voice already echoed through the yard, hard and demanding. "Up! Work doesn't wait for the lazy!" he barked. Annika, small-bodied and barefoot, ran toward the river with the clay pot too heavy for her tiny arms. The morning dew made the path slippery, and when her foot slipped, the pot cracked, spilling its water into the sand. She froze before even hearing his footsteps. The dread in her heart arrived first. Malam came down the path like thunder, shouting her name. He grabbed her arm so roughly it left a mark before dragging her home. The wooden post waited in the middle of the yard, silent, unmoving, cruel. He didn't ask what happened. He didn't care. He tied her wrists, laughing under his breath, and said through clenched teeth, "You'll thank me one day, stubborn girl." "This is how strength is built," Annika cried quietly, her tears falling without sound. She knew if she screamed, it would only grow worse. Sometimes the whip wasn't even needed. Her fear was punishment enough. That fear sank deeper than any wound, carving scars inside her that no one could see. From afar, the neighbors watched. Donna Selma opened her window, whispered a short prayer, then shut it again, muttering that she didn't want trouble. Mr. Bach kept his head low and walked faster, pretending the sound of the whip was only the wind. Everyone feared Malam. He was a man who fought in taverns, cursed at the elders, and never lost a brawl. The cruelty wasn't just in the punishments. It lived in the way he looked at the girl, in the way he smirked whenever she flinched. Sometimes, even when she did nothing wrong, his anger would find her. A misplaced laugh, a step out of rhythm, anything could bring the storm. The post became a witness to it all. It was darkened by time and stained by the salt of her tears. And yet, even when tied there, Annika would lift her face toward the sky, whispering the same quiet prayer. "God, see me. God, take me away from here." In that village, silence was a kind of armor. Everyone knew speaking against Malam meant risking your own peace. So people turned away, though their eyes betrayed what their mouths refused to say. They knew this wasn't discipline. It was cruelty. When he finally untied her, Malam pushed Annika to the ground like a sack of grain. She stood slowly, her little hands trembling. She never looked her mother in the eye. Naomi was rarely home during these moments. She spent her days in the fields, grinding cassava or tending to corn. At night, she saw her daughter's quietness and thought it meant obedience, never realizing it was the silence of fear. The bruises faded, but the sadness in Annika's eyes never did. They were the kind of eyes that spoke for her, heavy with stories too painful for words. She moved through the house like a shadow, afraid to breathe too loudly. The punishment wasn't just physical. It was ritual, a daily act meant to remind her she had no power, no voice. Even when the ropes were removed, she was still tied to that post in spirit. The real chains were hidden deep within her chest. At night, when the wind slipped through the cracks of the thatched walls, the house would hum with cold and loneliness. Naomi slept, exhausted from her work. But Annika stayed awake, curled into herself on the straw mat. The only sound was the steady song of the crickets, whispering to a sky that seemed too far away. "God," she whispered softly, "please don't leave me alone." Her voice was tiny, but it carried all the strength of a soul refusing to break. That corner of the hut became her secret refuge, a place where even Malam's shadow couldn't reach. In her thoughts, her real father appeared, a man she barely remembered, but still missed with every piece of her heart. She imagined him walking back through the village path, strong and kind, ready to save her. If my father saw me, he would protect me, she thought again and again until tears stole her voice. But even her tears were afraid to fall too loudly. During the day, she watched other children laugh by the river, running barefoot through the mud, their joy free and wild. Annika stayed behind the trees, watching them like someone peeking into another life. Her eyes longed to join them, but her fear held her back. Naomi sometimes asked gentle questions. "Are you okay, my child? Did you eat? Do you need anything?" Annika only nodded, eyes low, words trapped in her throat. Naomi mistook the silence for discipline, telling the neighbors, "My daughter is so obedient, so calm." She didn't realize that the silence was actually a cry for help too loud for the world to hear. At night, when cold winds touched her skin, Annika would curl tighter into herself, vanishing into her small frame. What hurt wasn't the chill, it was the loneliness, the pain of being unseen by the one person who could have saved her. Each morning she stared at the horizon, hoping that maybe, just maybe, her father would appear. But the road was always empty. Each time Malam dragged her back to that post, a little more of her light faded. The laughter of other children became only an echo in her memory. Her soul grew quieter, her hope thinner. The silence inside her became her only defense, her only way to survive. Those eyes, fragile, tired, and far too wise for her age, told stories no words could capture. They revealed a child caught between wanting to be loved and knowing she was not. Her innocence had been stolen too soon, leaving behind a shell of someone who didn't live, only endured. And in that gaze, hidden behind her ragged clothes and timid steps, was a truth the whole village tried to ignore. Because deep down, they all knew. A child whose eyes carry sadness also carries a secret that cries for justice. Malam's power didn't come only from his strength or his booming voice. His true danger was in how well he lied. In front of others, he was the perfect husband. Gentle, hard-working, always smiling. He knew when to speak softly, when to act like a protector. Naomi, tired and trusting, believed every word. But within those walls, his mask fell, and his cruelty returned full force, all of it crashing down on little Annika. In public, Malam played the role of a proud father. He would pat the girl's head, smiling broadly, and tell the villagers, "This one's got a future. She'll grow up strong with me." Some believed him. Others only looked away, unwilling to face the truth reflected in the child's terrified eyes. Annika, forced to smile, felt like a puppet being controlled before everyone. Inside the house, far from outside eyes, everything changed. The same man who praised her turned into an executioner. His harsh words lashed like a whip. The staged affection became humiliation. "You're weak, useless. You need to learn," he repeated, as if his brutality were some kind of life lesson. Annika shrank, trying to disappear, while Naomi, deceived by his facade of kindness, believed her husband's methods were just necessary discipline. Malam knew how to keep Naomi caught in his web. Whenever she showed doubt, he would draw near with soft eyes and a low voice, saying, "Woman, I only want what's best for this child. If I go easy on her, she'll never handle life's burdens. Better she cry now than suffer later." Those words, spoken with calculated firmness and sweetness, planted in Naomi the idea that he was a strict but fair guide. Her weary heart, which longed for peace after so many struggles, clung to this fabricated version of reality. It was a cruel game. Malam manipulated the daughter and the mother at the same time. He made the child believe her suffering was her own fault, that her mistakes brought on the punishments, and he made the mother believe the punishments were necessary, that her daughter's silence meant she was learning obedience. Every word he spoke was another knot tightening the invisible chains binding both women inside that house. The village, too, was divided about him. Some men praised him for being firm and decisive. Women whispered that Naomi was lucky to have found someone who took in her daughter. Buto, their voices in almost inaudible murmurs, noted they had never seen a real smile on Annika's face. The eyes of that child say more than he does, Donna Selma once dared to remark. Still, Noon confronted him. Fear of his fury weighed heavier than compassion for the girl. At night. When Naomi asked about the scratches or faint marks on her daughter's body, he answered with rehearsed calm. She was playing in the bush. You know how children are. But don't worry, I care for her as if she were my own. That phrase, repeated so many times, became a shield against any suspicion. Naomi, tired, allowed herself to be convinced. And each time that happened, Annika felt her heart tighten as if she were alone in a world that refused to believe her pain. Malum wasn't only violent, he was cunning. He knew when to raise his voice and when to lower it. He knew when to bare his teeth in a forced smile and when to clench them in anger. His manipulation was so precise that for years he managed to keep Naomi blind to the truth. And during that time, Annika learned to live on the edge between two realities. The lies shown to the world and the cruelty hidden at home. The manipulative stepfather even used the Ville's faith and values to strengthen his image. He said in public that he believed in discipline, that a child without order was like a tree without roots. Pretty phrases spoken with confidence silenced even the most suspicious. But to Annika those words were nothing but chains, because every speech of care was followed at home by another moment of pain. In that perverse game, Malum built for himself the mask of a caring father. While every day deepening his stepdaughter's wound, the girl, forced to uphold the theater, found herself trapped between the fear of the whip and the hope that one day her mother would see the truth. And so, while Naomi clung to his sweet words, and the neighbors preferred silence over confrontation, Malum's manipulation kept growing like a shadow, hiding the light of Annika's childhood. Time moved slowly in the village, marked by the burning sun during the day and the long nights of work and silence. Naomi, like all the women of her time, divided her days between the fields, the pounding of grain, and the chores at home. Her tired eyes hardly had time to notice details, and her heart, always consumed with survival, chose to trust Milam's sweet words. But as with every lie sustained for too long, the truth began to leave traces. One morning, as she was combing Annika's hair before sending her off to the village school, Naomi noticed something different. The girl's arm, usually hidden by wide sleeves, revealed deep scratches as if her skin had been scraped against rough rope. Naomi frowned and gently held her daughter's arm. Her voice came out in a whisper, almost afraid of the answer. "My daughter, what happened here?" Annika flinched. Her eyes immediately dropped to the ground, as they always did when she was afraid to tell the truth. Her lips trembled before she recited their Hearst line, one she had repeated so often. It had become a part of her. It happened in the bush. "Mama, I fell while gathering firewood." Naomi sighed deeply. Something inside her hurt. It was as if one part of her heart wanted to believe the girl, but the other clung to the simpler explanation. A careless child. Still, Annika's downcast gaze stayed with her. It was the same gaze she saw every night when her daughter curled up in the corner of the mat. Silence, fear, and now marks on her body. That day, Naomi worked in the fields. But the image of the scratches lingered like a shadow in her mind. The marks didn't look like a typical fall. There were parallel lines, signs of pressure, as if a rope had been pulled tight. Still, when she returned home, she found Malam smiling, working on a wooden bench as if he were a devoted father. He came, kissed her forehead and said, "I saw Annika trip in the yard. That girl's always daydreaming. But don't worry, I took care of her." The words sounded sweet, but Naomi's heart didn't settle. For the first time, she noticed a distance between the image her husband portrayed and the truth her eyes had seen. Doubt began to grow like a seed planted in dry soil, one that would soon take root. That night, while Annika slept curled up, Naomi stayed awake longer than usual. She watched the way her daughter breathed, short and shallow, the way she held her, arms tightly to her chest as if protecting a hidden pain. That scene disturbed her. She wondered in silence if she was blind, if she had believed to isolate her husband's words. But she quickly pushed the thought aside, reminding herself that Malum was a strict man. Yes, but also a provider. After all, wasn't that what so many women wished for? A man who didn't abandon them, who worked the land and brought food to Thetable. Even so, a mother's heart doesn't stay quiet for long. The doubt ate away at Naomi slowly, like ants hidden inside wood. She remembered the neighbors commenting that Annika seemed too sad, too quiet for a child. She also remembered the whispers she'd overheard, words sharp as knives. He doesn't treat her like a daughter, more like a servant. Back then, she had chosen not to listen. But now, faced with the marks, she could no longer ignore it. One afternoon, Naomi came back early from the fields and found Annika in the yard, washing clothes with her small hands, red from the harsh soap. She walked over slowly and saw how the girl kept her arms submerged in the water, as if trying to hide something. Naomi gently touched her shoulder and asked again, "Tell me the truth, my daughter. No one will hurt you. Was it really in the bush?" Annika's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. Her silence hurt more than any answer. Naomi's chest burned because she knew that silence was also a way of speaking. And in that silence there was more screaming than any words could ever express. That night, Naomi prayed in a low voice, asking God to guide her. She begged for her eyes to be opened, not to be fooled by the love she felt for her husband. And she asked for strength to protect her daughter, in case what her heart feared was true. Her mother's first suspicion doesn't come as a grand revelation. It comes as a quiet whisper inside the conscience. It is the instinct of someone who has carried life, who knows the signs of a child's pain. Naomi wasn't ready to say it out loud yet, but deep down she already knew something was wrong. Something deep, hidden, and cruel. And sooner or later, the truth would come to light. Market day was always highly anticipated in the village. Women gathered with their baskets full of corn, cassava, beans, and fruit. While the men negotiated cattle, tools, or small jobs, it was a day of hustle, of mixed voices, of colors spread across mats covered with goods. But for Annika, the market was no reason for joy. It was just another stage where Malam paraded his authority, turning the child into a target in front of everyone. That morning, Naomi had woken up early to prepare the products they would sell. She carried in her basket tightly bound cassava leaves while Annika followed behind with a smaller basket in hand. The girl walked in silence, her eyes fixed on the ground. She had already learned that any stumble, any delay would be a reason for punishment later. But Malam always seemed to be searching for an opportunity to show the world that he was in charge, especially of her dot once at the market. Naomi busied herself with trading. As she did every week, she chatted with the other women, bartered goods, offered her bundles of corn. Malam, on the other hand, stood with his arms crossed, watching like a guard. From time to time, he would call out to his stepdaughter loudly just to bark unnecessary orders. "Annika, get that, Annika. Faster. You can't even carry a basket, right?" People glanced sideways. Some exchanged murmurs. Other women, insolents, pressed their lips together, too afraid to step in. But the whispers began spreading through the market like wind in dry grass. "He doesn't treat her like a daughter. She looks like a servant. Poor girl." Naomi heard some of these comments, but her heart still wrestled with the truth. She tried to quiet her discomfort, telling herself her husband was just strict, that he wanted to raise her daughter with discipline. But inside a wound was opening because the whispers confirmed what she had already begun to suspect, ever since she had seen the scratches on Annika's arms. Meanwhile, the girl remained silent, enduring each command as if there were stones thrown at her soul. There were no tears in public. She knew crying would only increase the humiliation, but her downcast eyes revealed the pain no one dared to face. That day, Malam went too far. He ordered the girl to kneel on the packed dirt ground of the market to clean a basket that had fallen. It was a brutal sight, a child on her knees scrubbing the mud with her small, trembling hands while the stepfather laughed loudly and said for everyone to hear, "This is how you teach a lazy girl. If she doesn't learn at home, she'll learn in front of everyone." The silence that fell over the market was heavy. Some looked away so they wouldn't have to witness the cruelty. Others watched with outrage, but no one stepped forward. Fear of Malam's violent temper was still stronger than the courage to defend the child. Naomi, watching it all, felt her heart shattered. It was as if an invisible hand had gripped her throat, making it hard to breathe. She saw her daughter kneeling, heard her husband's mocking laughter and the whispers growing louder. Her soul burned with shame and doubt. In that moment, she realized she might have kept her eyes closed for far too long, but still, she didn't have the strength to react. She stayed silent, selling her goods, while inside her, a scream echoed. How much longer? For Annika, that day at the market became one of the most painful, not because of the fallen basket, but because her humiliation was no longer hidden behind their walls. Now, everyone saw, everyone knew, and still no one defended her. The whispers followed mother and daughter on the walk back home. Naomi walked with heavy shoulders, haunted by the words she couldn't erase from her mind. He doesn't treat her like a daughter. She looks like a slave. Shame mixed with fear. Her heart, torn between trust in her husband and the pain of seeing her daughter humiliated, began leaning more and more toward the truth she didn't want to admit. That night, Naomi couldn't sleep. Lying next to Malam, she listened to his heavy breathing, while in the corner of the mat, Annika stayed silent. The image of her daughter kneeling at the market, eyes full of sadness, kept returning. It was as if God was showing her clearly what she didn't want to see. Her daughter wasn't being raised, she was being crushed. The public humiliation didn't just wound Annika. It also cracked the wall of illusion Naomi had built. And from that day on, her doubt was no longer a whisper. It had become a clear, persistent voice telling her the truth was right in front of her eyes. The sky that night seemed to sense what was coming. Heavy clouds gathered over the village, covering the moon and blotting out the stars that on other nights lit up the yard. The air was dense, suffocating, as if even nature were holding its breath, waiting in silence for a decisive moment. The wind began to blow hard, shaking the thatched roofs and moaning through the cracks in the doors. To some, it was just another storm. To Annika, it would become yet another chapter of pain that would mark her childhood forever. Malam, with his unpredictable temper, had come home from the fields in a foul mood. The work with the animals hadn't gone as planned, and it took only the smallest detail to ignite his rage. Annika, afraid, tried to make herself invisible inside the house. She moved silently, folding clothes, putting things away, eyes fixed on the floor. But the storm roaring outside seemed to echo inside her stepfather's chest. It happened the moment a cup of water slipped from her small hands. The sharp sound of the clay shattering on the floor was the trigger. Malam lunged like a wild beast, grabbed the girl by the arm, and ignoring her pleas, dragged her out of the hut. The rain had already begun, heavy and cold, soaking the earth had quickly turned to mud. In the yard, under thunder splitting the sky, Malam shoved her against the post. With thick ropes, headied her wrists and ankles, tightening until they scraped her skin. The girl sobbed, but her voice was swallowed by the storm. The man laughed, cruelty smeared across his face, and raised the whip like an unrelenting judge. "This is how you learn," he shouted as the thunder answered from above. Each flash of lightning lit Annika's face pale, soaked, marked by cold and fear. She tried to curl into herself, but the ropes held her in place, exposed to both the storm and her stepfather's fury. The wind lashed her wet hair against her face, and the rain stabbed into her fragile skin-like blades. Inside the house, Naomi woke with a start at the crash of thunder. She turned on the mat, reached out, and realized her daughter wasn't there. Her heart clenched instantly. She rose quickly, calling Annika's name, but only the sound of rain replied. Something in her mother's instinct screamed of danger. Without hesitation, she ran into the yard, facing the wind that nearly tore the fabric from her shoulders, and then she saw the scene that would change her life forever. Annika tied to the post, her small body soaked, trembling from the cold, and Malam raising the whip, ready to strike. Even under the fury of the storm, Naomi's heart froze. It was as if the world collapsed before her. The sweet words, the excuses, the performance, all of it shattered in an instant. The truth stood there, naked and brutal, right before her eyes. Her daughter wasn't disobedient. She wasn't lazy. She wasn't weak. Her daughter was a victim. The thunder boomed above, but it was Naomi's scream that echoed loudest that night. A cry of pain, of outrage, the cry of a mother watching the blood of her own body be abused. "Malam, stop." Her voice cut through the rain, blazing with fury. He turned, surprised by her presence, and for a moment tried to put on the same old mask. "Naomi, don't take it the wrong way. It's for her own good, you know that." But Naomi was no longer the same woman. Her eyes were open and nothing could close them again. The shock of that sight ignited in her a flame of courage she never knew she had. The storm roared, the rain poured down, but nothing compared to the storm now burning inside Naomi's heart. The time of blindness was over. The mother finally saw what her daughter lived through every day, and there wasn't a lie in the world that could erase the truth the storm had revealed. In that moment, a new story began. A story in which Naomi would no longer be just a tired wife, but a mother who chose to fight, even against the man she had once shared her life with. Because there, before the post in the rain, she understood. No woman, no child should ever carry the weight of violence in silence. The rain poured without pause, thickening the mud beneath Naomi's feet. Her heart seemed to beat out of rhythm with the thunder, as if each bolt that split the sky was also tearing a gash inside her chest. The scene before her wasn't just painful. It was unbearable. Her daughter, Annika, tied up like a defenseless animal, soaked, trembling, her eyes half closed from cold and fear, while Malum stood, whip in hand, as if he were lord over every life. In that instant, everything Naomi had believed until then shattered into pieces. There were no more doubts, no more excuses. Malum's sweet words now sounded like poison. The man who claimed to protect was in truth her daughter's executioner. And the pain Naomi felt wasn't only as a mother, it was also as a woman deceived, betrayed in her most intimate trust. Sharon to her daughter, her feet sinking into the mud, her arms shaking, and let out a cry that mixed despair and courage. "Let my daughter go, Em. Let her go now." The stepfather turned in fury, his eyes wide at the interruption. He tried to justify himself, the whip still in his hand, but his mask could fool Noon anymore. "Naomi, listen. I just want her to learn. It's for her own good." But his voice had lost all weight. What did words matter against a scene so clear? Naomi ignored him and knelt at the post. Her hands, trembling with fear, undid the ropes binding her daughter. Each knot she loosened was like breaking the chains that had kept her heart blind for so long. Annika collapsed into her arms, exhausted, too weak to even speak. Her body was ice cold, her lips blue from rain and wind. Naomi held her tightly to her chest, trying to warm her with her own heat while tears ran down, mixing with the storm. "My daughter, forgive me. Forgive me for not seeing it before," she whispered, almost voiceless. Seeing his far unravel, Malum tried once more to assert himself. He cracked the whip against the post as if to scare them. "You don't understand, Naomi. This girl is ungrateful, lazy. If I don't do this, she'll grow up weak, useless." Naomi rose, her daughter in her arms, and for the first time looked her husband straight in the eyes without fear. Her voice came out firm, cutting through the roar of the storm. "Weak is you, mother. No man needs to beat a child to feel big." The silence that followed was heavy. The whip, still hanging in his hand, lost its symbolic power in the face of that woman's courage. The thunder that rolled right after seemed to echo Naomi's words, as if even Thesky bore witness to the injustice. Annika, though silent, clung to her mother's body, her eyes, always lowered until then, lifted for a moment, and in that look was a mix of relief and astonishment. For the first time, someone was defending her. For the first time, her mother stood before her, choosing to protect rather than believe the stepfather's lies. That painful discovery wasn't just a revelation of violence. It was also a revelation of truth. Naomi saw not only her daughter's suffering, but also her own blindness. Everything she had ignored, the scratches, the silence, the whispers of the village now stood before her like an open wound. As the rain kept falling, Naomi made a decision in her heart. Never again would she allow her daughter to be treated that way, no matter the cost, no matter the consequences. A mother's love, finally awakened from the shadow of illusion, had now become a shield against any cruelty. That night, the storm wasn't only in the sky. It was also the storm inside Naomi's soul, and within it was born a certainty that would change both their destinies, forever. Never again would they stay silent in the face of violence. The storm raged, without pause, and the wind seemed to push the whole village into that night of fury. But nothing was stronger than the storm now rising inside Naomi's heart. Holding Annika tightly, the mother no longer saw her husband as before. The man who had once seemed like a protector now stood revealed as a tyrant. The ground between them was no longer the same. It was marked by an invisible line separating love from violence, truth from lies, and this time Naomi would not step back. Sensing his authority slipping, Malam took a few steps forward. His shadow cast by the lightning looked like a giant's. He still held the whip in his hand as if it were an extension of his power. But in front of him no longer stood the submissive, weary, silent woman. Before him stood a mother, lifted up by pain and courage. "Put that whip down, Malam." Naomi's voice came out firm, cutting through the noise of the rain. "You will never touch my daughter again." He tried to smile, still hoping the tone of manipulation that had worked so many times might calm her. His voice came out softer, almost soothing. "Naomi, don't overreact. I only wanted to teach her. The girl needs to learn to be strong, to obey. Don't be ungrateful, woman. I work for this house. I bring food to this table." But Naomi was no longer deceived. Her gaze, once blurred by blind trust, was now clear, hard, piercing. "Don't speak to me of food when what you give is pain. Don't speak of teaching when what you do is destroy." Thunder answered the woman's words as if the sky itself joined her. Malam tried one last charge, raising his voice. "I am the man of this house. I decide what's right or wrong here." Naomi then stood even taller, stepping forward with her daughter in her arms, the rain pouring down her face, but without hesitation. Her voice came out with a force that rose not just from her mouth, but from her soul. "You may be a man, Malam, but you have never been a father. A father doesn't need a whip to be respected. A father doesn't harm his wife's daughter. A father doesn't hide behind pretty words while hurting an innocent child." The silence that followed was deafening. Even the wind seemed to stop for a moment. Malam, stripped by the truth of those words, stood speechless. The whip in his hand lost its weight. Annika, still frail, raised her eyes to her mother. For the first time, she felt she was not alone. The fear that had followed her for years gave way to a thread of hope. Because now before her stood the woman who had finally chosen to fight. Malam tried to step forward, but Naomi raised her free hand as if it were an invisible wall. "If you take one more step, the whole village will hear your crimes. Enough. Tonight will be remembered as the night your mask fell." Her words were sharper than any blade. They cut deep, not only into him, but into the complicit silence of the village that from afar was beginning to grasp what had been happening inside that house. Some windows opened quietly. There were eyes watching, witnesses to the confrontation that was finally taking place. The man, used to being feared, now found himself small before a woman who no longer accepted his lies. He still tried to argue to wear the mantle of head of the household, but the words came out empty. Naomi hadn't just heard. Naomi had seen, and that was enough. "Never again," she repeated, her voice loaded with certainty. "You will never touch her again. You will never raise your hand against my daughter again. If you need someone to take your ranger out on, let it be me. But no blow will ever fall on her again." The wind blew hard, almost carrying away her last words. But Anaka heard them like a bomb. Her mother had finally defended her, finally chosen her. The weight she had carried in silence began to lift. Even if slowly, even if in the rain, the confrontation wasn't only between husband and wife. It was between lies and truth. It was between cowardice and courage. It was the silent victory of a mother who, after a long time, had become a true mother again. And that stormy night sealed a new destiny. Malam might have strength in his arms, but Naomi had something greater. The strength of a mother who had awakened late, but awakened forever. The storm had passed, but the night brought no rest to that house. Naomi's words still echoed between the mud walls, stronger than any thunder. Malam, offended and exposed, sat in silence for a few moments, trying to recover the authority he had lost. But Naomi had already made her decision. She would no longer allow that man to cross the line of respect. The cord had snapped, and nothing could tie it back together. The next morning, the sky was clear, as if the day itself were a promise of change. Naomi rose early, but not to make breakfast as she always did. She rose to gather her courage. While Annika still slept, the mother watched her daughter's face, so fragile, so wounded, and felt a wave of pain and tenderness flood her chest. She gently touched her hair and promised silently, "Never again, my daughter. Never again." When Malam came out of the bedroom, his face still dark with rage, he found Naomi standing with her arms crossed. There was something different about her, something he didn't recognize. The submission had vanished. The woman who had always listened insolence now had an unshakable firmness in her eyes. Naomi began, her voice steady. "This house is no longer yours. Leave." He laughed, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. Don't talk nonsense, woman. This house is as much mine as yours. I built these walls with my own hands. I feed you both. Who are you to expel me? Naomi took a deep breath and her words came out like blades. Who am I? I'm the mother of the girl you tied to the post. I am the woman who believed your lies. I am the wife who let herself be deceived by your false care. But now I am also the mother who will never again allow you to touch my daughter. And if it's true you brought food, remember this, food does not wash away blood. Work does not erase cruelty. The silence that followed was tense. Malam tried to step closer. Fiestas clenched. But Naomi moved forward, shielding Anaka, who was now awake, watching the scene wide-eyed. If you take one more step, the whole village will know who you are. They already whisper. They already suspect. Today I will tell every neighbor what you've done. And don't think your strength will protect you. A man may be feared, but when the truth spreads, even the strongest bow before shame, Malam stopped. For the first time he hesitated. His pride still tried to impose itself, but the woman's voice had the weight of truth. He hurled insults, shouted harsh words, called Naomi ungrateful, foolish, worthless. But Naomi did not back down. The neighbors, drawn by the noise, began to approach. Donna Selma, Mr. Barco. Even some curious young men appeared at the wooden gate. They saw the scene. Naomi firm Annika clinging to her, and Milam's face twisted with rage. Then the voices began to rise. We always knew the girl never smiled. He didn't treat her like a daughter. Little by little the murmurs turned into statements. These of the crowd weighed on Malam like stones. For the first time, he felt the force of the community against him. That respect forged by fear began to crumble before the revealed truth. Naomi, through tears and courage, repeated loudly, "Leave me. You have no place in this house anymore." He tried to argue, but the voices of the neighbors had already become a chorus of disapproval. The man, once feared, now stood surrounded by shame. He threw the whip on the ground, spat words of hatred, and left, stomping in the mud like a wounded beast. When silence returned, Naomi fell to her knees, holding her daughter. She wept, not only for Annika's suffering, but also for the shame of having believed for so long in a cruel man. Her tears were of pain, but also of relief, because though the separation was painful, it was also the first step toward freedom. That day, the whole village learned the truth. There was no more hiding, Naomi cried, yes, but in her tears she felt the weight of silence begin to lift. And Annika, wrapped in her mother's arms for the first time, cried not out of fear but out of hope. The separation was painful but necessary. It was like tearing out a rotten root so the tree could bloom again. Naomi knew the road ahead would not be easy, but she was determined. Never again would she allow her daughter to be a prisoner of fear. The next day dawned differently. The silence in the house was no longer the silence of fear, but the heavy breath of a weary heart that at last had been set free. Sunlight streamed through the cracks, lighting up the packed dirt floor, and Naomi felt that this was a new beginning, one still marked by the pain of the night before, but a beginning nonetheless. For the first time in a long while, there were no heavy footsteps from Malam echoing through the yard. No barking orders, no threatening whistle of the whip hanging nearby. There was only her and her daughter together, trying to understand what life would look like from now on. Annika, still fragile, awoke with swollen eyes, but found her mother's face leaning over her. Naomi held her hand tightly, as if asking forgiveness without needing words. The girl's heart beat lighter. For the first time, she felt she had a safe harbor. Her pain was no longer invisible. She hugged her mother tightly, and in the tears that followed, there was not only sadness, there was relief. News of Malm's expulsion spread quickly through the village. People spoke among themselves, recalling signs that had always been there, yet no one had dared to confront. Some criticized Naomi for taking so long to see it, but others recognized her courage and finally putting an end to it. What was clear now was that from that day forward, the image of the violent man began to lose its power. He may have had strong arms, but he no longer had respect. Naomi in turn felt the weight of shame. She cried alone, remembering how many times she had believed his lies, how often she had defended him from the neighbors' whispers. But when she looked at Annika, she reminded herself that there was still time. Maybe she had taken too long, but it wasn't too late. She could still rebuild her daughter's trust. Still show her that her mother's love was stronger than any whip. Practical life, however, would not be easy. Without her husband, the workload doubled. Naomi now had to care for the field on her own. Whole firewood, cellar goods at the market, all without the male support that so many in the village saw as indispensable. But what looked like weakness was, in truth, liberation. Because every grain of corn she pounded, every bundle of firewood she carried was done in peace, without violence looming over the house. Annika slowly began to change. At first, she still walked with short, cautious steps. as if she might hear her stepfather's cruel voice at any moment. But as the days passed, she allowed herself small gestures of childhood, a shy smile as she played with a pebble in the yard, a curious look while watching the other children run through the village, a soft, muffled laugh when her mother told her old stories around the fire. Each gesture was small, but to Naomi they were miracles, signs that her daughter was beginning to live again. The relationship between the two began to transform as well. Naomi worked to be more attentive, more present. She no longer accepted her daughter's silence as she once had. Whenever she noticed Annika withdrawing, she would sit beside her, gently touch her shoulder and say, "My daughter, your voice will never be silenced again. You'll always tell me what you feel because your heart is far too precious to stay hidden." Annika would cry, but she felt in her chest the security of knowing she now had a mother willing to truly listen. The bond, once broken by manipulation and fear, was beginning to be restored. Over time, Naomi began to be seen differently in the village. Some women sought her out in secret, admitting that they too suffered in silence at the hands of violent husbands, but lacked the courage to act. Naomi's decision became an example, and her home, once a stage for suffering, became a symbol of resistance. Their new beginning wasn't easy, but it was real. It was made of tears, of double the work, of uncertain nights. But it was also made of courage, of small smiles, of steady steps toward a new life. Naomi understood that sometimes it's better to walk alone with your daughter than to live accompanied by the shadow of an oppressor. And Annika, little by little, learned that her pain didn't define her, that there was enough love in her, mother's heart, to heal the scars of the past. And so between harvests and prayers, between hard days and nights filled with hope, mother and daughter found a new way to live. It wasn't a perfect life, but it was a free one. And for them, that was enough. Life carried on in the village, as it always does after the storms. Thiessen rose again. The birds returned to their songs, and the children ran once more along the river. But for Naomi and Annika, nothing was the same. The pain had left deep marks, and at the same time opened the way for a quiet rebirth, one marked by courage and the decision to never again remain silent in the face of injustice. In her weary nights, Naomi would watch her daughter sleeping and feel a mixture of regret and relief swell in her chest. Regret for having believed lies for so long, for confusing silence with obedience, discipline with violence, but also relief for finally seeing the truth, even if late. It was as if God had opened her eyes at the exact moment Annika needed her most. "My daughter," she would whisper, stroking her hair, "you will never walk alone again." Annika, in turn, had learned a lesson no child should ever have to learn. So early that pain is not invisible even when everyone pretends not to see. She discovered that silence can imprison, but it can also be broken when someone chooses to listen. And above all, she learned that true love, even if delayed, has the power to heal the deepest wounds. The village, too, was no longer the same after that stormy night. The whispers gave way to reflection. Many, once silenced by fear, began to realize the weight of complicit silence. Others, moved by Naomi's courage, started to look more closely within their own homes. It was as if that one episode had sparked a collective flame, the awareness that violence cannot be hidden behind polite smiles, nor justified in the name of discipline or authority. Humiliated and cast out, lost the respect he believed he had. He might still have the strength of his arms, but he no longer had a voice in the community. The mask of the good husband and caring stepfather fell in front of everyone, and all that remained was the memory of his cruelty. That was the price of his choices, losing not only the family he claimed to provide for, but also the honor he tried to uphold through appearances. Naomi, despite the pain, found a new peace. She discovered that it's not better to have a man in the house than to live with destroyed dignity. She discovered that sometimes what looks like loneliness is actually freedom, and she realized that a mother's love once awakened is stronger than any oppressor. Their new beginning didn't erase the past, but it gave it meaning. Day by day, Naomi and Annika rebuilt their bond like someone patiently stitching torn cloth. Every smile from her daughter was a victory. Every step taken without fear was a miracle. Every peaceful night was a blessing dot in Naomi's heart. One truth bloomed like a deep-rooted tree. It is better to live without a husband than to let her daughter be silently sacrificed, because true love is not measured by sweet promises, but by the courage to protect, and because in the end, every mother carries within her the strength to rise, even if late, against any darkness that threatens her child. And so, between tears and smiles, between painful memories and renewed hope, Naomi and Annika moved forward not as victims but as survivors, not as prisoners of the past, but as women who chose life, truth, and love. And this story told around the village fires remained as both a memory and a warning. No violence should be hidden behind false smiles. A child's silence is never just obedience. We must listen with the heart because sometimes the loudest scream comes from silence itself. If this story touched your heart, let us know where you're watching from. Leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like the video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to the channel. That really helps us keep bringing you real and emotional stories like this one. Thank you for being part of our